not winning 90% of your new business because you have some sort of incredible value.
I'm going to take a bit of a different angle.
I've got a budget this big. I'm going to give it to you because you have a really killer plan.
You give a Red Bull to a turtle, what do you expect?
I think that's a dead turtle. So let's move on to...
Eureka.
Cheers.
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 Does your current premium finance company lock you into long-term agreements? That's because they don't want you talking to us. At IFS, we win your business the good old-fashioned way, with customer service. I know you don't always have to use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Insurance Pint Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Reed, and as always, I'm joined by my colleagues, Steve Earle, CEO of Cheap Insurance.
Hello.
Adam Mitchell, CEO of Mitch Insurance.
Hello.
And not yet here in person, but here in spirit is Jeff Roy, CEO of Excalibur Insurance. And today we are super pleased to be joined by the world famous tag team of Curt Wyatt and Pete Tessier from the Insurance Podcast. Hey guys.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, it's great to be on the show. It's it's high tech. I'm looking at people and bars are bouncing on the screen. Pete, like, we don't have this stuff. What's going on?
Well, we're more of a KISS model, right? Keep it simple, stupid.
You have good mics though.
We're the Digital Insurance Pint Podcast, so we gotta go with the tech, right? But you guys do have killer mics. I'm sure you can bust out a cappella version of Bohemian Rhapsody at any point here.
But there's an 8 out of 10 chance that they're not hooked up.
Exactly.
Awesome. And Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for guys.
Normally we have a nice, script with a bunch of questions. We have a flow. We're going to do a little more free form today. So I'm going to pose a question to the gang here, and we are going to essentially riff on that theme. It's a really, we think really important question. And the question boils down to, why are brokers not gaining more market share? Right? That market share needle between broker, agent, direct over the last few years, it's been sort of stable. It goes up and down a little bit, but why are brokers not getting more market share? Clearly, the brokers have the best delivery system, with the advice, multiple markets, advocacy, all that stuff. Why is it not knocking the heck out of the directs and the agent channel?
Do you want the long or the short summary really quick, Tom?
Up to you.
Let's say we're not all created equal, right? So I bet you if you broke down, this is the top level of your premise. If you broke down who are the innovators and you could get decent reports, you'd probably see the innovators are growing, but there's a lot of stagnation at the other end of the spectrum on the broker distribution channel. So I look around this group and I see innovators. We're probably, fighting and having successes and some failures. But as Jeff says, we're not afraid to fail, first attempt in learning. And we're probably finding some opportunities where others aren't. But the biggest point, if you want to float all boats, is that we have inefficient systems that some customers find way more appealing if you're going to a direct, because it's seamless. It's easier. It makes sense to them because they can compare it to their other shopping experiences, whether in person or online.
Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe I'll just, speaking of this group of innovators here, so, insurance growth is an interesting one because obviously rate gets baked into that, right? But if we strip the rate out and just look at PIF count growth, if I look at Steve, Adam, and Jeff, are you guys growing your PIF counts, right? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, 100% PIF and policy growth.
Yeah, Jeff's growing PIF. Steve, you growing PIF count?
Well, go the other side. Like, if market share is growing at 3%, just holding steady would be immigration, somewhere in the 3. So if you're north of that, you're taking market share from somebody. because GDP is not.
That's basically where I was going with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing you have to look at, though, rates going up, right? Like that's kind of a misnomer. You talking about policy growth only, and are you talking premium growth? Like a lot of people are getting a lot higher growth this year, but the premiums have gone up 4 or 5%. So you got the gross domestic product growing, and you've also got rates growing on top of that.
Because from my perspective, rate is a complicating factor, right? If rates go down, your revenue goes down. If rates go up, your revenue goes up. It doesn't really determine your market share per se, right? Your market share, depending how you calculate it, the way I look at it in the terms of true growth is, are you growing policy count or client count? And as Adam pointed out, the population grows, around 2-3%, give or take. So as long as your policy count or your client count is going up by more than 2 or 3%, you are net gaining on your competitors. You're growing market share. And if you're not, like you could be growing 10%, but if 12 of those points is rate and -2 is policy count, you look like you're growing, but you're actually shrinking.
Well, policy count's an important metric because you need to know, are you acquiring more customers or more business than you're losing, right? Your retention rate and everything. But I think one of the things that we don't do very well as insurance brokers is we bring in ideas of churn. There's a whole class of policies that are likely to churn that are out of our control. So you need to understand what your churn rate is and where that fits in your customer segmentation. And if I hear the next person talk, when you bring up the word segmentation, say, oh, you got your A clients, your B clients, your C clients, they're going to throw a can of bubbly through the screen because I don't give a crap about A, Bs, or Cs. That's stupid. It's old school and it's outdated. You know what? You need to like A's. If you can't identify an A client and you need to segment them into that, you shouldn't be in the business. That's the most obvious thing out there. It's intuitive. What you should be doing is thinking about what is your segmentation that's likely to churn, and then what's your average retention run on those clients, and then that determines the experience. Because if you can automate that experience for clients that are likely to churn, have low retention, and you have an average stay with them in that class of business, you're going to make way more frickin' money.
I think it's a good call out or observation on, I think, separating efficiency from effectiveness is slightly different, and so we've adopted a bit of a mandate of don't jump right to technology. So beta test everything with a person, a program, whether that be your retention, your phone answer, your segmentation, whatever, and then you can apply technology, whether it be RPA or APIs or bots or other things to help reduce your cost of operating that winning tactic.
Why is that cost, Adam, high though? Like, I wanted to answer the question initially, why aren't we getting more market share, more than we are, with because a lot of times our experience really sucks. So why does our experience suck? And you talked about innovators who are growing. In my experience, in talking to other innovators are the ones who are the most frustrated with what we have in front of us and the hurdles involved in order to deliver a better customer experience, or one that doesn't suck compared to what the directs are doing.
Yeah. I mean, so we finished last year, to put some numbers to it, at a 33% growth clip, right? Let's strip out 5% for GDP and immigration growth and say, okay, you're left with your 28. Of that 28% growth, 60% came from direct writers. Okay. So like, we trade punches back and forth, and the other part came from competitor brokers. But could it have run more efficiently and us made better margin and or use the money for other things? Yeah, absolutely. Could our acquisition costs have been lower? Sure. Our cost of retention, to Pete's point, could have been better. Like, that's really expensive to remarket people, and you don't get paid for that. But that's now part of the duty and service. And so I want to separate the two of like being able to run an efficient model versus running winning tactics. Because I think running winning tactics is what allowed us to grow and acquire some clients. The fact that our bank's not happy and that we didn't make money while doing it is an efficiency side of it.
And I think you have to, I think some great points everybody's brought up, but let's go back to segmentation too. Like when you're taking them from the directs, are those people as sticky? And once you have a good value proposition, or one of your insurance companies, let's see, CAA's got really good rates right now. You've got them attracted, but all of a sudden the rates go up. Have you built a sticky enough mousetrap to retain those people? Are these people actually, some of the direct people shopping is event? Oh, my renewal is up. Let's go shopping this year. And there's certain segments of the market that they shop every single year, and the stickiness factor and the retention is quite a bit less. So, what secret sauce? What can you do, or what kind of journey do you do for the people that don't really care about advice based versus more direct base? And I think we're picking up a lot more directs than we in the industry, the more innovative ones, but it's harder to keep those because, again, we don't control pricing. Our actuaries are all over the map on pricing, trying to figure everything out, especially with all these big reinsurance increases in cat events, right? So I would just kind of challenge, like, how do we segment, what kind of journey? If you identify somebody as somebody that doesn't care about advice, and you have to be the cheapest thing and put them in a box where they just get everything's automated, and whenever somebody puts their hand up, whoever picks them up is great, versus an advice-based model where you have a dedicated account manager where there's a little higher cost, but there's a stickiness factor, but the person appreciates it. I think you got to have those two sides of the spectrum right now in Canada. And, most people can't identify who those people are. Their BMS doesn't let you code anything and capture any additional information. So it's super hard for you to build journeys and stuff for each of those parties to make them unique.
Hey guys, I think it comes down to advertising and marketing. Tom and I have been to a few of these workshops over the years. I'm backing up the bus a bit. Brokers aren't spending the money. Like the money needs to be spent. If you're going to bring in the client count, and Adam disappeared for a second, it's too bad, because really what I'm guessing is that he's spending way more on advertising than the average broker out there is doing. So not talking about the guys on the screen, because you guys are thinking outside the box. I think that the average broker in the communities across Canada just don't spend the money that the big players spend, whether it be a direct writer, whether it be some of our nationals today are going to start stepping it up. I'm pretty sure they kind of have to. They've bought all these brokers and spent billions of dollars doing it. They better have a marketing campaign soon. But I don't know, where do you guys stand in past shows on what brokers spend on advertising and all sorts of advertising?
Well, I'm not going to answer that question, Curt, about what we spend on advertising right now. But what else I could tell you, in my opinion anyway, is that there's a whole bunch of money available, or could be available to brokers to spend on more advertising and retaking market share if we weren't spending it on things, had to spend it on things that are making us inefficient. So when we have dedicated teams to portal work, and there's, I don't know what, like I've got five. You put that across all the brokers that are key clicking, doing things inefficiently, opening eDocs because they don't know what they are because they're coded wrong. All these things take people, and if we could spend less on stupid donkey work that is forced down our throats and spend that on retaking market share, in my opinion, it's dollars and cents, right?
I mean, my experience was you needed some scale to really get at advertising. And if we're seeing the industry kind of go into two camps, you've got the big guys, the 50% now that represent, call it more than 20 locations. And then you got the other half that's 3 or less. Is that going to be a challenge to these sort of smaller brokers? Like you said, Steve, is they're spending their money on admin costs. They don't have the extra dollars to spend on, call it, real advertising. And I'm not talking about their golf club membership that they push through on their income statement. I'm talking about real advertising.
Whoa! I thought this was a safe space, Curt.
But you know what I'm getting at, right? Like, or is that what we're up against? Are we going to start to see some of these big players hit it really hard here now that maybe with higher interest rates, the M&A craziness is going to back off, and now they're going to make some money?
Curt asked a question. Adam, what's your expense ratio on advertising? I know mine. What's yours? What are you spending?
Somewhere between 10 and 15%.
Bingo. Yeah. So we were at, like, when we were learning, we were at 17 or 18%. It was painful because if we compared our EBITDA to a broker that hasn't done anything, it wasn't great, but we learned a lot. So we're down to probably about,
I'm just under 10.
We're down to about 11% right now. So we've got it down. So every year.
So you're Adam and Jeff, your solution is just to spend more money on advertising or be more efficient?
No, wait, we're not jumping into the solution. We're just answering
Yeah.
Curt's
So
question. We got lots of solutions.
Let me jump in here because I will say, having looked at many brokers over the years, being in the double-digit range for marketing spend is way more than the average broker, way more, right? So that when you're talking innovators, modern brokers, they are investing that kind of money. So I think that kind of backs up, I think, where you're probably going to go with that, Curt.
Yeah, but hang on, Tom. Just to get back to Steve's point, he raised the right point. If I spent 10% of net revenue on advertising, strictly advertising, the ownership here would toss me because it would reduce profits, it would reduce net profit so much. And the reason that is we're spending so much money on things that could be improved upon through simple technology. So it goes right back to Steve was saying, I could spend a lot more that are on things that are measurable returns, right? But I can't because I'm bogged down by a whole bunch of antiquated processes, systems, and technology that doesn't talk well together, nor does it function in the way we're told it functions.
I think this is great feedback because this ties back to our original question, which is why our broker's not getting more market share. And so you've got some brokers who are choosing to spend a significant chunk of their net profit, reinvested in marketing, and there are others who are not for a variety of reasons. The problem is, I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is a significant chunk of your expenses that are being spent on, as Steve would say, key clicks, additional people, inefficient processes. That's wasted. That is non-revenue generating expense for the sake of expense money that, if you had it available to you, could therefore be invested back in the marketing. And now your partners, your shareholders, would not toss you at the window for spending that money because it was net new money in a sense.
I think traditionally a lot of brokerages aren't really prolific sales agency. Like in PNC, there's a lot of order takers, and you become in the industry and you become the insurance person and you go to it. Like it's only in pretty recent times that these things are scaling up to be really big competitive businesses. I think like of the automation line, I think if you wanted to figure out how much I could save from really slick systems, you would go down and add up how many admin roles do you have in the business, right? And if you add up that line item, like that's probably what's going to evaporate first. Maybe you could say some sales go away with e-commerce, but I think that's a bit of a stretch. We're talking about the people that are currently doing what underwriters used to do for brokers 8-10 years ago before it got downloaded.
I'll give you a number because we did some math, toying around at IBAC that, it's literally tens of millions of dollars for the broker channel dealing with eDocs that aren't coded right. That was just one
eDocs.
thing.
Just eDocs.
That was just eDocs, right? So those tens of millions of dollars, like I think it was 15 or 18 million dollars. We just, did some really rough math on that's all money that could go back into gaining more market share right now. So let's assume that everybody is all brokers are satisfied with X as an EBITDA. I don't know, make up a number, 20, 25, 30, it doesn't matter. If we could take those admin costs, like Adam was talking about, and the administrators, and take that on, cost of just key clicking and put it over to growth. So you have your broker who's only spending 2 or 3% on advertising right now because it's a luxury. All of a sudden, they're up to 10 or 12% in advertising if they chose to do that. And they're going to be gaining market share as well.
And the problem is there's a lot of people now that haven't been doing it. So they got to figure out, how do I start marketing? How do I get an audience? And I will point out that commercial is different. There's a lot of great shops doing commercial, and it's the old fashioned. They've got centers of influence, relationships. They got referral networks. They're out making cold calls. They're doing things traditionally. They're out pounding the pavement on that. So there's some good shops that have done that, and they seem to be able to scale it. They've also come up with programs, group plans, things like that, where they've got the exclusive. They could channel their marketing dollars, but that's been all kind of tapped, and all those things have pretty much been beat up over the last while.
Wait,
so
Jeff, let me interrupt there for a sec, because based on the last market share data that I've seen that comes out of IBAC, brokers own something like 92% of the market, commercial market, right? The agent channel has 6 or 7, and directs have like 1 or 2, right? So even if it comes back to our, growing market share in commercial, you're taking from the brokers. You're not growing the broker channel's market share. So this really is a first lines battle if we're talking specifically about market share. And you know what, they're right. There are better ways to do commercial, and there are lots of things that are going on in that space that'll make it better. But for market share, brokers already own that whole pie pretty much.
Okay, so we're actually now narrowing it down to not everything but personal lines. There's a big difference, right? And then, by the way, TD jumped into commercial right now, and you've got, is Bel Air in yet? Are they doing it? Like, well, you're going to have the next wave of directs trying to go into that market, so that 92% is going to be under attack more than ever, right?
Well, and they know that it's being handled by the broker channel, so that's why they're going after it, because the brokers don't spend money on brand. They don't have it. They have a community presence, but have they really built a brand?
Let me just jump in here because I think, and I'll come back to you in a sec. So I like Adam's 10% here, because if you take the 2 or 3% that traditional brokers are spending on marketing, and you take that 10%, all of a sudden you're at that 12 to 13 that innovative modern brokers who are growing are spending, right? So it basically, I think what we're saying is, hey, if we can get rid of this, these key clicks and this inefficiency in the system, every broker would have the opportunity to do as much, and these guys would have the opportunity to do more, but every broker would be able to rise to a level of what the current top tier brokers are doing. That's huge, right? That's market share growth instantly.
Or just maybe for those who aren't the top tier brokers or need to be there, you just make a little more money in your pocketbook at the end of the day, which isn't a bad thing either.
Sure.
Like, we're not in here for trading dollars.
No, and that's why I say opportunity. And some brokers will choose to put the money in their pocket, and some will choose to grow their business. But where I want to go with that is say, hey, there's this opportunity here. What is preventing the broker channel from seizing that opportunity? How do we go? Great. If we just magically got rid of all the key clicks, there's this huge opportunity. What's stopping us from capturing that 10%?
Well, we already know what's stopping us, because we've now established that the administrative costs are one of the things killing us. But I'd like to see what Pete and Curt think of, instead of what is killing us on this administrative costs, who is killing us?
Well, to unpack the Tom one for a second, if I said we're spending 10 to 15% is where I was going on marketing, and someone else is spending 2 or 3 to marketing, if I outspend you by 7x year after year for a decade, I got to tell you, my number is getting really big on that investment, and you're going to get drowned out on it. And I just finished lunch with Lance and Matt from Surex, and they make my advertising number look like peanuts, and they're going to drown you out. So it's a bit of an arms race of, you need to continue to get big enough so that whether you're spending 2% or 10 or 15, that's got to be a big enough number to suck the air out of the marketing room. It doesn't end well if you can't compete there somehow.
But you've got to know where you're marketing. That's the other thing. One of the things we don't do a really good job of is understanding our total accessible market and where that is and where the opportunities are. We're still low hanging fruit on demographic marketing and where those opportunities lie. And that's so you guys operate in some bigger centers. When you get to places that aren't as demographically dense in terms of population, business, and stuff like that, you really take a different look at how you do things, because that's the fear front. I don't live in your world with some of the threats that you have, but I know they're coming. And it gets really scary when you don't have a level of a density that can support a multitude of options, and the best one wins. Like, you have a different reality than other brokers do in some capacities.
I think, but to Adam's point, Pete, that if you're not spending that money, and now let's say Adam's scenario was looking back 5 years ago where he started to build a brand and added more and more to it. And that was before we went through 5 years of this just, explosion of M&As, let's call it, where now you've got those players who do have the marketing dollars. And I'm not saying that anyone who hasn't spent the money to build a brand should give up, but if there's a time when you should be marketing, it should be now, because the likelihood is that doesn't matter where you live, there's going to be one of these, call it multi-provincial brokers now in your trading area that I think they're going to come on heavy with brand here in the next 12 to 24 months. They have no choice. If they've ran out of money to buy, not to say they ran out, but maybe the money is getting a little harder to come by, then where else do you get growth? And that's going to be marketing, building brand. You've bought this business. Let's market the living crap out of it and convince people to come in, because we know that the big brokers don't give better service. So you got to make it look like you give better service. It's like a cheeseburger at McDonald's isn't the best cheeseburger, but if I see the ad over and over again, I'm pretty convinced it's good.
I think somewhat just before I forget this thought, but the one challenge you have with these big brokerages gobbling everybody up, they got venture capital money and they've got a gun to their head to hit 35% EBITDA. Then they're going to have an event where they sell it off to somebody else and it gets tighter and tighter. How are they going to, and by the way, they're trying to pull together $3 billion of business under one name that's been bought up all across Canada with challenges with technical systems and everything. They're going to have a year or two to sort all this out. And I'm convinced they will sort it out, but they have less than what you think they have, because they've got to figure out how to work with all these people. Some of the branding needs to be done and fixed, and they have to agree on that. So how do they find the money to do it? When they should have more money to do it, it may be more difficult for them than maybe a smaller broker.
Let's have another debate. I'll take a position on it for the fun sake of clarity and debate. But what if I say it's too late, Curt? If you haven't been awake and piling money into this thing, building up momentum over the last 5 or 10, pick a different avenue. Because right now, the battle that's happening in SEO, SEM, AdWords, even with the aggregators and there's lots of other arenas. You can be door knocking or matter in your local populace or partnerships or vertical integration. But I don't know, man. I'll take that position, just boldly say it might be too late to start.
But I know what you're saying, Adam. I think these fights where you're going with this is can you even catch up, are going to be really relative to your market area. I don't think it's a universal philosophy across the country. I think it's going to be really relevant to things I've spent more time in Toronto this last year than I have in the previous 10, and it's just a different reality. I go out to Vancouver all the time. It's just a different reality of culture and business and how things behave. And those markets, those big ones, are going to be their own battlefields that are completely different than the Regina, Saskatchewans or the Winnipeg, Manitobas, right? And they're going to be different than the Southern Belt in Ontario. They're all little different areas. And that's what I think there's going to be opportunity in, because I'll tell you one thing about, and I'll speak about the prairies, and I think this applies to other areas in Canada too, because we are a sparsely populated country outside of a few areas. People don't want to see insurance brokers leave any more than they want to see the grocery store close, because they see it as a decline of their community. There's a lot of support and love for these entities such as us, who are there, community driven, are a pillar, provide financial security. And what's the underlying thing about insurance and financial services? Trust. People trust the insurance broker. And I think there's an opportunity there, but we've got to look at it differently. And it requires more than just great SEO and marketing. It requires presence, and it requires culture, and it requires a sense of being available. And so I'm going to go back to IBAO this past fall, and I should remember her name because we did a podcast with her, but it was what's her face from Advanced Symbolics. And she talked about the AI they did on what customers are looking for, and what they did a comparison, what brokers think of value is and what consumers think value is in the broker, in the distribution channel. And they were totally unaligned. Consumers want advice. We think they want choice. Choice is, I'm a contrarian in this. Choice is the most overrated thing we can provide because it sucks up resources. I should be able to talk. Let's talk personal lines. I should be able to talk to a customer and sell a policy and know within 3 minutes what company they should be with. And to get back to where we're talking about with efficiency, the technology should be in place that I'm not spending my time asking them a multitude of things to get their freaking valuation on their home, to find out what kind of plumbing they have and how old their roof is, because they don't bloody care. They don't know that. They just got in a bidding war to buy their house. They don't know, the real estate agents. I mean, don't even get me started about them. They don't provide a lick of help. And what we should be doing is assuring them of advice, but instead we're bludgeoning them with things that technology could help us provide a way better experience. And that means the broker is going to win, because it gets back to what Steve said. You take out these things that we're wasting time on, and you get them back to having meaningful human advice and connections, you're going to win. Because people only think about insurance a few times a year, and after they thought about it, they forget it until next year. And that's why they keep coming back to a human. That's why they haven't given up on the broker channel. Long live the broker. Like, it's true.
Erin Kelly. Yeah.
Right. Erin Kelly. That's the lady. And I'm gonna die on that hill. I might be wrong. And when I'm standing on that hill by myself waving the flag, I might get run over by whatever aggregator out there and the hedge fund behind it. But I don't see another way to change things if you can't scale up.
What you do is there's a 10% thing, cancer, in every broker's business, right? Some people are overcoming that by having partnerships and local presence and yada yada yada. Some people are doing it through SEO and SEM and cool tools and so on, depending on their market. But there's still that 10%, boulder that's sitting in your business, right? You could do more rink boards, in Regina if you had 10%. Adam could do, get ranked, number one instead of number two on Google, et cetera. So to me, what you do with that 10% is entirely up to your local situation and your local business model. But the problem is that everybody has that 10%, right? So how do we go and crack that nut? Like, is this the carrier's fault? Is this your BMS vendor's fault? Is this the broker's fault? Like, who needs to crack that nut?
Well, I'm gonna disagree with Pete a little bit here, because his story's correct, but you have to promote it. Like, the consumer's not looking to find out what the broker is doing for them until they have a claim, possibly. But what you're saying, Pete, is entirely true. Adam, or someone on the line here potentially, is taking the time to promote that message using a number of tools, advertising tools, not just digital tools to improve service, but rather promote that message beyond the doors of their office. I think that 10% has to be spent. If you're not spending 10% today on advertising, you are not going to grow. That's my belief. And I know when we were in the brokerage business, it was far in excess of 10%, and our growth was far in excess of our competition. It worked. So, I mean, I'm living proof of it. So, and I'm on a permanent holiday, as Pete says. So, challenge me on that. Why am I on a permanent holiday? Because I did a shitload of advertising.
So I just want to come back to that. That's great. So we all agree you need to have this 10%. Whether you do Pete's approach, whether you do your approach, Adam's approach, whatever, still comes back to that 10%. How do we get that 10%? Who's going to make that number move? Whose fault is it? Who's going to make that number go from the expense side of the ledger, into the asset side of the ledger? I think that's completely wrong accounting, but I think you guys know what I mean.
Well, we're skirting around the issue, right? We have challenges. I'll say it. I'll be the evil guy. We have challenges with the relationships between the entities of the tech and product providers that we deal with. And we know there's efficiencies out there that are ubiquitous, not to insurance, but to all business, that are not really being adopted. And there's a lot of excuses that are coming back to it. And that's just basic usage of APIs in data transmission. Gloss it up, dumb it down, however you want. That's where this leads to. And you guys are pushing it. We're pushing it. Everyone's looking at it. Adam's looking at the floor. He's not sure what he wants to say next. But that's what we've got to get to, right? We know there's a solution out here. We all know areas where it's working. I think Jeff and I are in touch with a lot of people in the States that we see real meaningful change using things like APIs that are driving solutions and opportunities. And it's just not moving much here. There's a lot of energy being put into it, but it's Tom, and you're at the forefront of it. Are we pushing a massive boulder up a steep hill? And will we ever get to the top and get it going the other way?
Yeah. So just to channel Kurt's Greek vacation, sometimes it's like Sisyphus, right? And for those of you who don't know that, that's the guy who's condemned to push a boulder uphill every day, only for it to fall back down when he gets to the top, and then do it over and over again, right? So
yes, you have many leather-bound books, Tom. You're so bright and cultured. Before you guys get into the pieces, can we quantify how big this is? How big is the broker channel? Is it 50 billion?
Yeah, it's about 60 billion, because 60% of the 80 is personal lines, of which brokers have half. So that's 24, I want to say, and then brokers have most of the remainder. So
here's a fun piece of traction, because if you take 60 billion and times it by 14%, which would be the total revenue going into the brokerages, and let's say that our numbers hold true as a representation, and everybody's spending 10% on admin that really could be automated, that's $840 million a year. I guess it's stimulating the economy, but it could be used to better good. Like, you want to put the government behind it? Hey, there's 840 millions of savings.
Yeah, or 840 million of advertising that the broker channel could do, right? Which is a mind-boggling number.
It's a lot of waste.
Okay, so instead of saying how do we grow broker market share, we should be saying how do we get some or all of that. So what was the number again?
840 million.
800. How do we get some or all that $840 million working for the broker channel?
Tom, I'm gonna flip it over to you. You're working for IBAC, so tell us what you're doing to help us get claim get the boulder uphill, or get the 840 million back to 10%, whatever. How are you helping at IBAC? What's going on there? And then at the end, is it enough, or what can be done to help it? And then Steve can talk about CZO.
Yeah. So basically, what we're trying to do at IBAC is get critical mass. That's basically what it really boils down to: critical mass of carriers and critical mass of vendors, and then after that, critical mass of brokers, because it's all three of those sets of entities that need to put their shoulder to the boulder, which unfortunately rhymes. My apologies for that. So we have carriers such as Wawanisa, who have been leading the way on connectivity, and there's a bunch of other carriers who are investing in Guidewire and are talking about connectivity. And talking about their investments that they're going to make, or in some cases are in fact making. So we need a critical mass of those. We've got 9 or 10 carriers who are in discussions with IBAC about working on this stuff together. And so the idea is that they would have a consistent way of doing that, that then there's enough mass that the vendors can then have something tangible to work with. Because right now, Wawanisa does things X way, and Aviva does things Y way, and SGI does things another way, and so on. And so from the vendor's perspective, there's this chaos, and it's very difficult for them. So, and then if the vendor's not doing
it's just like the rating engine.
Right. Yeah. So if the vendor's not doing things in a critical way, it doesn't really matter what the broker's doing, because they can't adopt it, right? Even if they wanted to adopt some of this technology, it's very difficult, because now you've already got your 9 portals and your 9 processes. And then Wawanisa comes along and says, good news, we have this API. And the broker goes, well, it's different. It's a 10th process, right? So to me, it all boils down to critical mass.
But okay, so let's get into this right now. Let's talk about the API, because I think there's so much. I don't think we've really pulled the kimono up and said, this is how this needs to work. And who is using an API right now in your business to conduct business? Any of the insurance companies' APIs? Is anyone using one?
Several have quoting APIs into ARS, right?
Into ARS. Okay, but okay. So all these APIs that are made, are they completely dependent on something to be used with ARS or the like, or whatever it is, or a BMS? Or can they stand alone in their own fashion? Are they dependent on a BMS?
They could, but the problem is they're not dependent. But here's the problem, and I think it was Walmanisa that said it best. Yeah, we exposed our API. We had to build 8 different versions of the API for brokers that wanted to use it. So that's where the problem is. So that's where I know IBAC and CZO Innotech are working at saying, here's the data that needs to go on all these different transactions. Here's what the field needs to look like. We need to build them together. So when we have one rating API that everybody uses, as opposed to having 10 different ones. And that way, every BMS vendor is not going to charge a pound of flesh.
Yeah, and that's sort of the CSIO side of the coin that Jeff's been sort of referring to, and one of the reasons why carriers have done things quite differently as well as vendors is, to date, the CSIO standards can be interpreted in multiple different ways, and therefore have been interpreted in multiple different ways, and therefore the implementation becomes very difficult. But I know when we did the IBAC marketing campaign around some of these APIs, I had vendors that I'd never heard of coming out of the woodwork. I had people from Singapore reach out to me saying, hey, we want to connect to your APIs because we want to do some cool stuff in Canada. And I had to say, well, hey, IBAC doesn't do these APIs, so you need to go contact a carrier. But I already know they're going to tell you no, because it's too expensive for them to deal with every Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes out of the woodwork, because they're not standard. And I think maybe I'll turn it over to Steve to talk about what's happening in that in that standardization world.
Well, I think in the last year, some things have changed in that organization, in that there was a new strategic plan that where brokers who are members of the CSIO really identified and put forth in that strategic plan that some level of governance of the standards needs to take place, and that's a process that's ongoing now, implementing that. And the insurers, for the most part, didn't really realize, like in my experience in talking to them all, that $850 million or $1 billion boulder that we're pushing up the hill, they really don't realize that it's that big. They don't think it's all that big a deal. But we really have a death by 850 billion cuts going on. So you gotta make, first of all, standards are only standard if they're standard and they're used in a standard way. So that means absolutely no room for interpretation. There's only one way to do it.
You sound like an underwriter, Steve.
Right? There's only, and what that does, if that just occurs, and it doesn't even have to be APIs, and it doesn't have to be portals. Something as simple as eDocs can save really tens of millions of dollars if they're all done the same, because we have software readily available right now that is ready to provide automation and efficiency, but it can't work because everything's different on the insurer side. So when Tom, you mentioned Guidewire, a lot of people are getting off their legacy systems. Guidewire doesn't know this either. I just think there's a general lack of awareness about this huge problem that brokers have, that 10%. So they're all looking for more business from us. The question has to be, if you want more business from us, make life easier for me. Come and sit in my shop and look at the workflows that we have to perform for you. So when you introduce a stupid little question that is different than everybody else, how that breaks things over here, it makes automation impossible. It just busts everything up and adds seconds of time and minutes of time. Multiply that by multiple insurers and different workflows. They just don't know what they don't know.
So, Steve, to your point, we talk about, billions of death by billions of dollars of cuts. How many billions have been put into Guidewire to not really move the needle on anything?
Oh, it's moved the needle, I think, on the insurer side insofar as their efficiency, but it has not touched ours. In fact, what it's done is made things worse.
But you go back to, can you guys grow for us? Can you find us more business? Oh, by the way, we're putting in Guidewire. We can't take any new submissions on these 6 classes of business for 8 months.
Okay, the transition zone is, the world. I was told for years and years the world will get better once we get off our legacy system, and then they're off their legacy system, and the world didn't change for me. And in some ways, it got even worse and more complicated. And now we have a low budget version of Guidewire out there. So every tiny insurance company who couldn't afford a portal before can now get one. So instead of 8 portals, I've got 12.
Well, and then what's the funniest thing is we had a meeting with some Guidewire executive, and it's actually cheaper to use APIs than to actually build a portal.
Let's do this. I'll be the insurance company exec, and I say, okay, so you guys tell me you're wasting collectively across the country $840 million. Let's round it up to $1 billion. What do I care? That's a you problem.
Exactly.
No, but like talk me off the point of like let's spell out for insurance companies why they should care.
Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. So your BD rep comes in here and says, "I want to talk about your plan for next year, Steve. How's that going to go?" Well, okay, so you're going to grow by X. Well, I can grow by X more with you if you're the most efficient insurer to deal with in my stable, right? If transactions with you go from 10 minutes to 5 minutes and everybody else is still at 10, you are going to get more business out of me. That's just simple math. So get the race on for lowering that time. Get the stopwatch out on each insurer. What's a new piece of business cost to get, or time-wise, length of time to get issued by your internal process by insurer, and measure it that way. Maybe that should be one of the benchmarks or metrics that we look at on an insurer by insurer basis.
And so I'll be the board member on Adam's insurance company, and I'll say, as they're reporting back and saying, oh, you guys can drop the time down. That means we have to hire less people to do the human stuff because you got more time to do it. And they just create another bottleneck, right? Like they'll just find a way to do it because they don't care. Oh, you save the time. They don't see it as an advantage for you. They see it as an advantage for them. It goes back to them. And that's a big problem, right? Like, I mean, just to compound the problems with technology, they're not even making investments in the time bomb we've all been staring at for 20 years, which is the demographic one of no one being around. Like, they never planned to hire more underwriters, never planned to hire more staff. They thought Guidewire would make everything so efficient they'd have more time, and it didn't. Like, I don't know of an insurance company out there right now who literally has enough staff to deal with the business goals that they want. Because they're walking into everyone's offices and they're saying, hey, how are we going to grow this year? How are we going to grow? How are we going to grow? Well, I can grow, hire more people to deal with the business we send your way. Right? So the tech should take away it should work on both sides right? We talk about it on our side of redeploying things. Well, if you can get the tech in place on the insurance for the insurance companies to change how they're reallocating resources, maybe you can put them to where you don't have enough and you've never had enough and where all your growth potential is, because we've made the efficiencies happen.
Yeah. So the 4 people right now I have dedicated to ABC Insurance Company portal work, I can put them on the sales floor.
Yeah.
What about this other side? Hey, we're not going to ask you to spend $100 million to re-platform your API and piece. Steve, you believe you can do this, and I'm recognizing there's a 10% friction tax on the thing. So pay on performance. I'll pay you a 10% override if you can do anything you say you're going to do to cover your cost. So you're neutral. You've kept your people employed. If you fail to show up and do anything, I don't have any cost, and I have no legacy architecture to invest in.
What you just described, Adam, is a growth incentive plan, which is something that I've done in the past as a carrier exec, and it works. Absolutely, it works.
But if we're honest about the friction happens when you're like selling and remarketing more so than just the policy change. Because if Pete calls up and says, I got a new BMW, we put that on, and yes, it's clunky, but it's when Pete wants to remove or move over to another market, or we have to recheck that it's really clunky. If it's just subbing the new, Rolls Royce that he has.
But the thing is that 10% override is impossible, right? It's not realistic. A carrier can do it once in a while, but if a carrier did that on their entire book of business, they would be well over 100 combined all the time, and they go to business.
No. I was commenting on the new, like the net new growth, where Steve said, "Hey, if you made this painless, and you allowed me to, take that money I was investing in the pain into there, I could grow for you."
Okay, but Steve's not getting his friction on the new; he's getting the friction on everything.
Is
Right?
he?
That's 10%. Yeah, because every time he wants to remarket something, do a policy change,
Oh,
whatever, he's got a bunch of key
well,
clicks.
the policy change whatever bundle is like a little nuance for me of like on new, I'm in your camp. I fully agree. On remarket, that's just new with a different financial label on it. It's all the same moving pieces. On the substitution or like, hey, print me new pink slips, I was like, it's not quite as clunky. If every substitution turns into a remarket, sure, we're back into the first camp of like moving business from company to company is really clunky.
How about being able to handle billing out of your BMS instead of 9 different portals? Billing is the most common touch point.
Billing is a massive pain in the arse. Let's take something super simple like a pink slip. Let me talk pink slip for 1 sec because it's so simple, right? Every other business in the world, if you want a new pink slip, whatever the version of it is, you, the client, go to their portal and do it your frickin' self. You don't call the broker, right? In your world, in our world, they've got to call you. You've got to log into that portal. Go print the pink slip. You can't even click it on your BMS. So there's even on those simple things, there's still friction. Maybe it's not the full 10, like there's a new business, but there's something in every transaction.
So if I'm Louis or Intact on this, I'm saying like, yeah, they can do that. Go into the Intact portal and get your documents. And if I'm Air Canada, like you can get your boarding pass on there. I don't care you bought it through Jeff Roy Travel Inc. Like it's sitting on the Air Canada app.
But if you had real connectivity, right, you can go into the Mitch Insurance website or Mitch Insurance app and get it, right? And you don't tell them to go to Intact or Wellness or wherever, right? You can go to the Cheap Insurance web portal because that's, how you've associated that your brand with that customer. It's yours. The fact that underneath it there's an API back to whatever carrier, get pink slip, is irrelevant to the customer. They're just going, wow, Mitch Insurance, I can get my pink slip online. I can, do all the stuff online. It's super simple.
So here's where we get down to the nuts and bolts of if a front end system is accessing the information to be served up to the clientele, it's going through an API. So for Intact to have a customer contact center and a claims app, it is accessing information in there. And there is a very secure way for us to have access to the exact same thing. So that's where we've now boiled down to a modern architecture to serve these things up to the general clientele is possible. And we all see the value of why the clients need the speed to it. And I think what we're asking for in this is not only do you need to build that, but at the same time, your broker partners should have access to that same thing that your front end does.
So just hearing you guys out and sitting back and listening to the challenges, and I've heard comments about having 10, 12 connection points to carriers. Is it thinking that APIs were going to fix this and it's going to take a long time, it sounds like still till that happens. Should it not be that brokers should just have less market? Like if you have the good relationships you have, do you really need to have, Steve, 10 quotes or 10 scenarios where you're going through or your team is having to go through with all those different sort of situations that each carrier brings? Like what's the magic number? Is it 3 or 4? I mean, we've always debated this. And
yeah, the magic number is 3 or 4 when you're talking about efficiency. But what 3 or 4 do you pick? Because you might pick, if you pick from a competitive placement, you just happen to pick the 3 or 4 that are 9, 10, 11, and 12 for the next 4 years, you're fluked for a little bit there when for your new business team is going to quit here and go work for Adam.
But is that part of Adam's grind on them when he says, I'm moving this book to you, I want 2 years of I want rock star status on all my quoting for these prices?
Yeah, rock star status in a regulated environment isn't really rock star status, especially in the auto. Like it's kind of limited.
I would say this is that micro conversations need to happen en masse across the country from brokers. It can't just be associations having difficult conversations. Every broker needs to go in, and when their BDM person comes in and says, I can give you a lot more business if you start aligning with CZO, IBAC, and make significant changes. Until those things, we start seeing the needle move, we're going to be inefficient with our business goals because you're not investing in efficiency. Like we've got to have the same message delivered thousands and thousands of times over. And every BDM's got to come back to their boss and say, why are my brokers asking me about this? Because the BDMs don't know anything. Like, they're nice people. They're good for lunch.
Stop asking for better portals.
Well, don't ask for better portals. Ask for tech. Ask for tech that goes right into our BMSs and say, you know what? Start holding a hammer over their heads too.
Okay. Can I say that the three or four market efficiency hypothesis is based on today's technology. It's based on using portals and horse shovels and what have you. If you had real API connectivity, we wouldn't be saying that. You wouldn't be saying how many markets is right, because the answer would be all of them. It would be all of them, right? And so to me, however you slice this particular cake, it's always coming back to lack of connectivity is causing major problems within the broker channel, right? Whether that manifests in expenses, in making subpar choices like not enough markets or having to invest in RPA or whatever, it's all because you don't have the right connectivity.
I think what everybody's saying, and Tom said it best, everybody's got to take a shoulder to push the boulder uphill together. It's not just brokers, it's not just carriers. We all have to come together, and we all have a role to play in this. And again, what's in it for me? We should be trying to look at what's in it for everybody. All the best teams of the NBA weren't selfish. They weren't all about themselves. The ones that figured how to play with everybody ended up doing a lot better. So we got a role to create the culture and the environment to make this happen, but there's lots of work to be done. So, guys, thanks for joining us and unpacking all this stuff. And we could spend 3 hours on it, and be a lot more fun in Vegas over a beer at TIC. But anyway, really appreciate you guys joining us.
It's always a pleasure. Let's do it again soon.
Pete will bring the mic, and then we'll get the real story.
Yeah, there you go. Good to see you guys.
Before we head out, I just want to give a big shout out to IFS Premium Finance, our sponsor, as well as the Excalibur Read to Ride program, our charity partner. Thanks very much, guys.
Is retention important to your brokerage? Of course it is. That's why at IFS, we have a cancellation prevention process. Want more details? Give us a call. I know you don't always use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.